Hi, everyone, and welcome to Woman Enough for Marriage. Thank you for joining me again. In Genesis 2:23, when the woman was formed, Adam said, "This is now the bone of my bone and the flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman." So the woman was derived from the man, and so was the name for the woman. And so this is a channel for both the man and the woman that are joined together in marriage. It takes two to tango. And I want to believe that, the things that I'm talking about on this channel are both beneficial to the man and the woman. So please, if you're a woman, do share with your husband. And if you're a man, please do share with your wife. Today, I'm going to continue the series that I started the last time on default modes. And just as a reminder, I said a default situation is what exists or happens unless someone or something changes it. And so our default mode of behaving, of doing things, is like our automatic setting, the way we behave and the way we respond to situations. I've titled my talk today, The School of Mom and Dad. And that's because our idea of marriage starts to form from a very, very early age, even before we start to understand the complexities and the dynamics of the adult relationships. We start by observing our parents, the way they relate with one another, the way they respond to each other, and the way their marriage is. And not just our parents, neighbors, uncles and aunties that we interact with, and unconsciously we start to develop our own idea of marriage, our own idea of how a man should behave in marriage or how the woman should behave in marriage, and our idea of what marriage itself is. We only need to watch children sometimes when they're role playing, when children role play dad and mom, and you see the way they're acting to actually confirm that children do pick things up. We might make the mistake as adults to say, oh, they're just children, they don't know anything. But actually, that's not true. The idea of marriage in children starts to form from a very early age. Say, for example, a man that never saw, his dad in the kitchen, or even a woman, whose dad never came into the kitchen, is likely to go into marriage with the idea that, well, as a man, I don't have to go into the kitchen. Or as a woman, my husband doesn't have to go into the kitchen. My husband doesn't need to help me in the kitchen. Or, people that never saw their parents show affection to one another, the chances are that when you then marry, you might not, your default will not be to show affection to your wife or to show affection to your husband because you've not seen your parents or anybody around you do it. When I was about 10, I heard a couple that we lived close by talking about going to have a shower together, and I actually saw them, going to have a shower together. And I remember thinking, as a child, I was really young, thinking, oh, that's a bit strange. Is that something a couple did together? And that stayed with me until I got married. And that's one thing that we've imbibed in our marriage whenever we can. And so children do pick things up. I never saw my parents did it, but just seeing them once, it was just one occasion. I was just close by and I heard them, and that stayed with me. And also growing up, my parents had separate rooms because that's what they did then. That's what the culture told them to do, and that's what they did. But I was fortunate that, before I got into marriage, I was able to unlearn that and actually learn that it's not only that couples should share the same room because there's so many benefits to it. It's also that your bedroom as a couple is your sanctuary. And so there's so many things. I'm sure as I'm talking, you probably are thinking of one or two things that you learned from your parents or couples that you saw growing up. Some of the things that we learn from our parents are not necessarily negative things. And if they're positive things, there are things that we can imbibe. But it's when we learn negative things that can then become our default when we get into our own marriage. And some of those negative things can actually become a thorn or thorns in the flesh of our marriage, things that are constant sources of conflict in our relationships. And unless we create awareness of those things and try to unlearn them, then it will be really difficult for us to change. As married couples, we should be willing to learn new ways of doing things. We should be willing to unlearn the things that we have learned before that have become our default mode. Learn how to love and care for one another, how to relate better with one another. We'll be doing ourselves a lot of injustice if we hide behind how our parents did it as an excuse. If we start using it as an excuse, if it worked for my parents, then it should work for me as well. And we should not be using those things to justify ourselves. That, well, because sometimes say things like, I'm doing better than my parents. My dad never did dishes, but at least I do dishes once in a while, and yet you want me to do dishes more. So we need to be people that are willing to learn and unlearn. We are of a different generation from our parents. There was no mobile phones in my parents' days. Now there's mobile phones. Knowledge is increasing. The knowledge of technology is increasing. The knowledge of how to do things better is generally increasing. And the knowledge of the Word of God is also increasing. Let's say, for example, now we know that before Paul talked about the woman submitting to the man in verse 22 of Ephesians 5, we know that in Ephesians 5:21, he actually says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And these are some of the things that we've been taught, that's been emphasized in when our parents were having their relationship. That means that sometimes women were surprised because this is what we were taught. And so some of the things that we've learned from our parents, we need to bring them into the light of the Word of God to actually know what the Word of God says about them. And our parents as well. Every parent wants their children to do better. If our parents want us to do better in every area, that would include marriage. We too should want to do better than our parents. So if our parents did it this way, it doesn't mean that we should stick to that and say, this was how my parents did it. We should be learning to do things better. As children, most of us were not exposed to the struggles that our parents faced in their marriages. So if we are using our parents as our examples, or saying this is my default mode because this was how my parents did it, and we're not willing to change, we're actually subjecting ourselves to those struggles. Some women, some of our mothers did not enjoy their marriages, but they only stuck to it because they didn't know any better. They didn't know how to seek for support. They didn't know what to do. And our men, our fathers, you don't know what struggles they went through. So if, for example, somebody grew up in a home where their dad was the one that provided everything, and so they come into marriage expecting the husband to pay all the bills and say things like, your money is our money, my money is my money, because my dad paid for everything. We're not to know the stress and the struggles that that father went through, because that was how the culture defined it then. It was almost like it's an ego thing. As the man, you must provide everything. Let's try to do better. Let's not try to fit ourselves into the boxes of the relationships of our parents. Let's try to do better. Let's seek more knowledge. Let's create the awareness of those default modes, the things that were picked up from our parents that is affecting our relationships negatively. And let's seek for better ways of doing things. Thank you so much for joining me again. Let's remember that marriage is to be enjoyed, not to be endured. And as we continue to work on our marriages, as we continue to make effort to improve ourselves, we shall reap the reward of a blissful and a happy marriage. Thank you so much. God bless. Bye.